what our output is. So we can see it streaming, generating response, and there we go. Welcome to the channel, and in this video we're going to build our very own chatbot built with Streamlit on the front end and OpenAI on the back end. So before we get started, let's jump in and see what we're going to be building in action. So I've got the chatbot open here, and I'm going to ask it a few questions here to see what is the final project that we're going to have as an outcome once we finish this video tutorial. So the first question I'm going to ask the chatbot is to tell me a short story and see what it generates for me. So we can see it's generating a response here, and it is now streaming out the response back into the user interface for us. I'm going to ask it another question here. So I'm going to say, give me code, give me Python code to add two numbers. So nothing too complicated here. We just want to see what kind of output we get here. And you can see that it streamed out the Python code for us to add two different numbers together here. So that's the application that we're going to be building from start to finish. You can see over here we've got some chat options over to the left hand side. So we could select the GPT-4 model if we wanted to. And then I've got some other options here, such as temperature. We'll dive into details in this a little bit further as we're building out the application. So we can increase the temperature, which creates more uniqueness to the output of the underlying model. And then over here, we have an option to set what is the max token length for the output for our chatbot here. So this is what we're going to be building here from start to finish, from starting developing the front end user interface all the way to coding the back end Python code to interact with the OpenAI API here. Now, before we get started here, I have put together a GitHub repo. So I'll go up to the top here and go over to the GitHub repo. So there's multiple branches to this repo here. So you don't have to start completely from scratch and set up your environment or set up the project folder structure or anything like that. So I'll put this down in the bottom in the description of the video, but you'll be able to come here and just grab this command here to clone this starter project. That way you don't have to build out your project structure in the end. And then I do have another branch here that is our main branch, and this has all the completed code here. So you'd be able to come in here and we can see all the code that is going to be part of this chatbot here. So if you wanted to, you can get started and just go to the description down below and actually clone the starter project repo. So matter of fact, I am going to walk through this step by step so that way you can see how you can do this on your own. So I am going to copy this here, and I am going to go over actually to my download. So I'm going to delete this here and move it to the trash can. And now I'm going to go here, drag that down to the terminal, and the terminal opens is on my other screen. So I have this. I'm going to just paste in that command. I'm just going to put this project in my downloads folder so we can get started. Now you can see that I have this. I'm just going to rename this folder for simplicity, starter project. And I am going to open this in Visual Studio Code. So depending on what your idea of choice is, I prefer VS Code. So I've opened this project now in VS Code, and we've got our starter project here now. So you can see that we have the complete project structure that I have put together here. I'll just briefly outline what I've got here, and as we develop the code, a lot of this will make a little more sense. So I created a helper folder where I have some helper Python files here. So LLM underscore helper. That's where we're going to put the code for communicating with the backend OpenAI API. So here's just blank. Then I have a config file. So this is going to be a file where I store some configuration information. So this will be a Python class that stores things like references to environment variables. That way we don't have to type things out and hard code values. And the next file that I have here is the requirements.txt. Now, this file here is, it actually stores a reference to all the underlying Python libraries we're going to need to complete this project here. So we've got a reference here to OpenAI, reference here to Streamlit, because we're going to be building our user interface with Streamlit, and then python.env, just because we're going to be dealing with some environment variables within our development environment as we build out this application. And then lastly, this is going to be our main file here, the simple underscore chatbot Python file. This is where the core functionality of our project is going to exist. So I've now outlined the project structure at a high level. So if you've cloned this project, you can follow along from here, from start to finish. And by the time you're done with this video, you'll have a completely functioning chatbot. So one thing I want to do is I am going to, if you're in Visual Studio Code, open up a new terminal. So if you go to the top here and click new terminal, because we're going to have a couple commands that we need to run. Now, just a heads up, I am running this in a dedicated Python environment. I'm using Anaconda to set up and run my dedicated Python environments here. If you're unsure about how to set up your own dedicated Python environment using Anaconda, I've got a short video below in the description that'll show you how to set this up fairly quickly. So what I'm going to do now is type in terminal down here, because like I said, I'm using Anaconda as my Python environment. And everything that we're going to be coding is in Python here. We're not going to be using any other languages. So I'm going to type in conda. Let me blow this up here a little bit. That way, if you're on a smaller screen, you can see it. So conda activate. And I have a environment called Streamlit underscore env. So this is where I develop out any applications that are Streamlit based user interfaces. So I'm gonna hit enter here, and we can see that I now am in the Streamlit environment by this here that's in parentheses, the Streamlit underscore env. Now, because we're going to need some Python libraries to build this out, I have the requirements text here that I mentioned before, where our Python, the dependencies that we're going to need for Python packages are referenced. So that way we don't have to run multiple pip install commands or type things out, OpenAI, Streamlit, python.env. We can just do a -r, which allows us to reference a file. Now, this allows us to reference the requirements.txt file here to install our dependencies. So I'm going to hit enter here. So it's going through this here, and it is now installing them. If you've already installed some of these, like OpenAI, you've already got that running in an environment, then it's just going to say already satisfied. So I'm going to run clear, and now we have our dependencies set up, our Python packages that we're going to need. I am going to now, just to make sure everything is running, I'm going to run Streamlit run simple underscore chatbot.py. Now that's referencing this this particular Python file over here. Now I'm going to hit run, and of course we get a blank screen. We haven't put any widgets or anything like that on our within our application yet. So I'm gonna close this out, close that out, go back to my project here. And so I'm back in my project. Go back over to my files really quickly. Oh, actually, I opened up the wrong one. I've got multiple open, I believe. Let me just make sure. Let me just drag this back down here. All right, so we're back here. So I'm going to stop this here. Now we are going to need an environment file here. So I'm going to create a .env file, and for those who aren't familiar, this is a way for us to store environment variables in a development environment here. So this particular environment variable, we're going to call this OpenAI underscore API key. Now we do need our OpenAI key that we're going to use. So we're just doing some quick setup and configuration that we know we're going to need later on. So I'm going to go back over to the browser. I'm going to just go OpenAI docs. First thing that shows up. Okay, so I'm already logged in here. I am going to go to my API keys here. I already have one for that I set up for demo. I'm going to create a new API key. So demo 2, and I'm going to click create. Now, just a heads up, OpenAI has added extra capabilities inside of the settings where you can now restrict what API keys can do. You can set a read-only API, or you can restrict it to only accessing certain models, right? Here, we're just going to say we want access to everything in the OpenAI API. So we're going to click secret. We're going to copy this. Don't worry, I will be deleting this once this video launches. So this will not be there. So I'm going to save that here. Never, just kind of heads up, never check in your .env file into a GitHub repo. Fortunately, if you do check this in by accident, OpenAI will detect that and disable this key for you. But just for future reference, be sure you don't check the .env file in. But just a way for you to prevent that, be sure in your git ignore that you are ignoring .env files here. And then I've got some other ones here, like this one here, and then PyCache files or Python caching files that are hell. So we don't want to check that type of stuff in. All right. So we've got our environment variable set up here that we're going to use when we build out our chatbot here. Now, like I said earlier, we have this config file here that we know we want to actually be able to reference certain things and not have to worry about whether we're typing them correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and code this file out here. So we're going to import OS, and then we're going to create a class. We're going to call it config here. And then we're going to create some constants in this class that we are going to reference here. So OpenAI, we're going to actually use these constants later on when we are actually making calls to the OpenAI API. So we're just going to get that environment variable here that we created. So we're going to call this what our environment variable is that we set up in our .env file. So that's what we called it. Next, we are going to create something called a system prompt. And this is a way for us to steer our chatbot to only operate in certain constraints, right? So we can just say, hey, you're a helpful chatbot, right? Or whatever you want. I've got some text here that I'm just going to paste in. That way we don't have to, you don't have to watch me type it in here. So I've created a system prompt here. You are a helpful chatbot assistant that can answer questions for users. So we kept it pretty simple. You could, add anything you want in that system prompt, but we'll use this system prompt later on, and we'll use this API key later on. So now we've got some housekeeping done for setting up our environment variables and setting up our config class here with some constants in it. Now we can start coding out our actual chatbot here. So go ahead and navigate to the simple underscore chatbot file there. So we're here. Now we are going to need to do some imports here. Now we're going to need to import Streamlit and we'll just do as st for shortcut. And then we'll jump into some of the Streamlit documentations as we're building this out too. So don't be too concerned if you don't understand certain things that are going on. I'll explain things in deeper detail as we build this out. Now the other thing that we want to do is import our helpers. So actually, we're not going to import that one yet. We haven't added the methods and functions that we're going to need. So we'll add that import later as we get to that piece of code here, or get to that piece of code. So we're going to import config. So that's our config file over here. We're importing that class. And then the next thing that we need to do is import the .env library that we're using to load environment variables in. All right, so we've got our import statements in there. Now at the very top, I'm just going to call this here. This loads in the environment variables that we have here. So that's what that function does that we're importing. Next, we're going to go ahead and set up our API key, reference to our API key up at the very top. So we're just going to go ahead and configure that. Now this is where you're going to see why I set certain things up. So we're now going to reference that config, and we're going to reference the OpenAI API key here. So we, normally you could go here and, type in your API key here. That could be error prone if you copy something incorrectly. So we're going to avoid that by using our class here and referencing that constant. So we never have to worry about did we type our API key incorrectly. Now we just reference this here. Now next, we're going to set up our page configuration for Streamlit. And so here we can set up some basic configurations like page title, right? We're going to do page title. We're going to call this Streamlit OpenAI Chatbot. And we're going to do one more. We're going to set up one more setting here. We're going to set the initial sidebar to be expanded. That way we can see the options that we set up. So I've got that set up now. Now let's do this. Let's set up the title. Now again, I'm doing ST here. Just kind of quick explanation for those who may miss this is we're referencing Streamlit as ST. So that's why we're using ST. And we're going to set the page title. And this is what shows up in the nav bar in your browser. OpenAI Chatbot. Okay. So let's rerun this here. So we've got something should show up on the page now. So let's just make sure everything is working properly. I'm going to type in Streamlit run simple chatbot.py, and this should open up for us now, and we can see the title on our page. So that's all it's showing right now. And we're going to go back over to our code. All right. So we've got our title set up. Now we're going to need to set up a way for us to track the messages that our chatbot has generated. So I'm going to create a list here called messages. And it's just going to be an empty list that we initialize here. Now, one thing that Streamlit has is it has a way for you to store things in session state. So and that's going to be stored in your browser's session state. But we want to make sure that the session state is initialized. So we're going to do some checks here really quick. So I'm going to do if messages not in st session state, and this is part of the Streamlit library here. So we're checking inside of the Streamlit session state to see, is there a reference to messages at all? And if not, we are going to do st session state, and then we're going to do messages equal, and then we're just going to do this here. We're going to do that empty list again there. Now that we have session state set up to store our messages, and again, this is handled by Streamlit for you. So now that we've got that set up, now let's go ahead and set up our sidebar navigation. So this is where we're going to set up our options for when a user is using our chatbot. What model are we going to be using? What's the temperature that we're going to pass to the model? And then what's the max token length? So let's set that up now. So I'm going to type in with, and I'm going to do st sidebar here. Now, with is a way to say, basically, we're operating within the context of this sidebar. So anything that we place indented in with underneath this with is going to show up as part of our sidebar. So I am going to type in st markdown because we're gonna embed some markdown. So if you're familiar with creating markdown files using, for example, our README document over there is a markdown file. So you can use your what you're used to doing with markdown here. So we're gonna save that, and we're just gonna say, hey, we just want to kind of title up there a header for chat options. So that should show up if we refresh this here. So we can see our chat options are now showing up there. So now I'm going to go back to our application here. Now let's add some controls and some widgets here. Now I am going to grab a link to reference. I'm just put some documentation in here. Actually, let's open this up to look at some of the Streamlit documentations as we're adding widgets here. Now, I'm going to click on this documentation. It's going to open it up. This is going to take us straight to the Streamlit select box. So this would be a drop-down box. So we're getting all the different options that we have here. Again, in the completed code, there will be a reference to this documentation link. I'm not going to go over everything here. Let's just scroll down to the example. So we can see the example here, that they put in their documentation. And if we go here, we can see that the options that we had that are entered up here, email, home phone, mobile, show up in this dropdown. So if you're ever wondering how to use one of the widgets that Streamlit offers to you, that's how you do it. All right. So let's go back there. And let's now add a widget of our own. So we're going to do model, and this is going to store the model that we select. So again, we're using GPT 3.5 and GPT 4 as options. So we're going to do this here, select box, and then we're going to say what model would you like to use. And then here in our options, we are going to, let me put a line break in here. Actually, let me do that. Okay. Let's put a line break there. That way it shows up. So we're going to do GPT 3.5 turbo, and I'll show documentation to how you can go and look up these if you're not familiar. Now GPT-4. So those are two models we're going to allow users to use. Now let's add another widget here. We're going to call this temperature. Now this is the parameter that the model expects to come through that allows us to set how unique or how creative is the model going to be with its response. So we're going to use a number input here. So st number input, and then we're going to just name this temperature. All right, get rid of that. Let me minimize this. Actually, I'm going to close terminal. That way we can get a better view there. And so what I'm going to do is put the value. So the value here is the default value. So I like to start with a 0.7 as the temperature when I'm testing things out with the different large language models. And then we're going to do min value. So this is the minimum value that the temperature can be set to. So 0.1 is the minimum value. And then our max value that we can set the temperature to is going to be 1.0. So everything is either from 0 to 1 when it comes to values. But in this instance here is 0.1 is going to be the low. That makes sense to put a 0 temperature value in. All right. So next, let's add one more widget like we saw when we started out the video. We'll call this max token length. And again, this is going to be a number. And I'm just going to copy this here. We're just not typing things out for the heck of it. And we're going to call this max token. Where did that go? Okay. Max token length. And we are going to say 1,000. And this could go up to like 8,000 tokens. So I think that's the max for 3.5. I know there's some models that have larger context windows, but we'll just stick to this some round numbers to keep it simple here. And we're gonna say min value. Let's just say 100, and again max value is 1,000. So we've now added our widgets to our sidebar, so they should show up. Let's see if we've got any errors here. So we'll go back here and we will refresh this. So now you can see our options show up over here. So our drop down should show GPT-4 and GPT 3.5 Turbo. And then again, we can go down here. We can continue to go down. You can also type here if you want to for simplicity. Let me do that. And one thing I do want to add here is I want to add what we call a step value here. So go back up to temperature. We're going to do step. And so this is just when you click the plus sign, what's the value that it increments by. So we want to step by 0.1 there. So we go back to our app and we just refresh. Now when we do this, it goes down by 0.1 or up by 0.1 or down by 0.1. So there we go. Okay, so let's go back over to our app here. And so we've now coded our sidebar. So now let's move in kind of to the meat of the application here. Now we're going to actually start coding functionality to actually build our application out. Now, I am going to start with a for statement. Now, what I'm coding up right now is a way for our user interface to loop through the messages that are stored in session state. So I'm going to say for message nst session state. And again, we're storing our messages in session state called messages that we set up here, right? So that's why we're setting that up there at the very top. And that's why we're initializing it. So now if there are messages that are being stored there, so if we've had a conversation with our chatbot and that message has been stored, then that should render onto the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and code this out. So we'll do with st chat messages. Now this is a widget built into Streamlit that will allow you to display messages based on role. So there's multiple roles that this particular chat message widget recognizes here. So there's a user, and then there's an assistant. So you'll see that further down in the code. So I won't go too much deeper into that. So we're doing with, and so we're going to make sure that the output here, we're going to do st markdown, and we're going to do message, and then we're going to do content. And you'll see once we get further down the code, you'll see how this is written to our session state. But again, so we're looping through session state here for any messages that we have. And then we're going to display a chat message widget on the screen if we have messages. And it's going to show the distinct role. So this could be an assistant, or this could be a user. And we're going to just say, what's the content of that message? So this could be a user message, or this could be the actual chatbot message. All right. And feel free to put questions below in the comments if something's not super clear, and I need to clarify something a little more. I'm more than happy to answer your questions below. So now we've got our messages displaying if we have any in session state. Now what we're going to do is actually start communicating with the model, or actually start prompting the user for their question. So we're going to store this in user prompt, and we are going to do, so here we're saying if a user has typed something in, or so we're basically saying, hey, when you display the chat input to the user on the screen, and if they enter something into that chat input and hit enter, store it in this user prompt variable here. So we're here, and we're going to do chat input. And again, chat input is a Streamlit widget that allows you to input content into a chat box. And basically, it's an easy way for you to build chatbots without you having to build all the controls from scratch. So again, we're gathering that user input here, or we're gathering chat input and dumping it into a user input variable. Now, this here accepts kind of a placeholder. So what questions do you have? All right. So that's what we've done there. And now we're going to hit enter. And now we've got to do some more setup here. So what we want to do is also loop through or look at what messages a user has asked. So we want to be able to store that and display those here. So if a user has entered something here, we want to display the question the user's asking on the screen. Because right here, we're just gathering that input and storing it in a variable, but we want to see what the user is also asking with output. So this is going to be basically echo the user's question. So chat message here, and this is a user chat message. And we're going to, again, we're working in the context of this user's chat message here. We're going to output this. Again, I like to use Markdown because we've got a little more control over formatting. And we're just going to copy this here, and we are going to write the user's question out as Markdown. So let's see if this is functioning. So I'm going to go back to the browser. We are going to refresh. Now, thing to call out here is we now see the chat message box down there. And let's go back. So this here, this chat message, all right, IntelliSense keeps popping up. All right, so the st.chat input is what is causing that particular input box at the very bottom to appear. So it handles rendering the chat input box and the button all at the same time. So you didn't have, normally you would have to code this out completely from scratch if you're used to building things in React or some other JavaScript framework. You would have to do a lot of work to build out that control there and to disable the button if a user hasn't added input in. All this stuff is taken care of for you. So let us go back there here. Actually, let's go ahead and code up one more line here. Let's actually add the question the user is asking to session state. So here, let's go type in st session state, and then we're going to do message or messages, and we're going to append this because, again, this is a list. Now, it expects it to come through as a dictionary here. So that's what Streamlit expects. So Streamlit expects a role to be in the dictionary here that we're going to use later. So we're going to say the role is user. And this determines the icon output also. So if the role is assistant, the icon is going to look like a little robot. If the role is a user, the icon will show like just a person's head or face. So you'll be able to see a little bit of this later once we actually have this fully functioning. So, and next thing here is the next value that we're going to set, or the next key in this dictionary, is going to be content. And this is the content that the user inputs. So we're just going to say user prompt. So we've now, when we ask a question, the value is stored in the user prompt here. And then we say display a chat message. And within the chat message, in the context of that chat message, we are going to show markdown of what the user asked. And then we're also going to store that in session state. All right, so let's go back over to the browser and see if this will function for us. So we'll just randomly type something. Who are you? All right, so it just echoes it out on the screen for us. We're not communicating with the OpenAI API yet, so we're not getting anything back. Obviously, we're just coding up the user interface, coding up the session state to store the user's question that we can then see a history of the user's question. So if I type in another question, let's see, can you write Python code? And I enter that. So you can see it's just echoing out anything that I type here, and it's storing that in session state here. All right, so let's go back over to our code so we can see that our user interface is functioning. We can see our sidebar has the options, and we can see we can type things in, hit enter, and it'll appear on the screen for us. Now we're going to dive into actually communicating with the OpenAI API. We're gonna code the bulk of the rest of the application now. All right, so let's go back over to the code. Go back here, and next we're gonna code up. We're gonna code up some more user interface components here. So if you remember at the beginning of the video, we showed a spinner when the API was communicating with the backend OpenAI, or when it was communicating with the backend OpenAI API. So here we're going to now type in with. So again, with just means we're operating within a certain context after we type in a widget, because the widgets are basically nesting. We're basically nesting widgets when you see this with. So I'm going to say spinner, and I'm going to type in generating response. All right. So when we click that, let me go back down here. And so since we can't communicate with our API yet, let's go ahead and start coding up our LLM helper. So we're going to leave this particular class. I'm just going to comment that out. Now, we're going to go over to the LLM helper class here. So click on that, and we need to import some things here. So we're going to be using OpenAI. So we're going to do OpenAI import OpenAI. So that imports the Python library for us to communicate with the OpenAI library or API. We're going to also, again, call the import config. So again, that's the beauty of us creating that config file, is we don't have to fear, hard coding something in or having some typos. So we're going to first initialize the system prompt. So again, remember, over in the config file, so if we go back here, we created the system prompt here, because we don't want to just embed this in our code. So I just created a constant in that config class, but we're going to reference that now. So we're going to do system, and we're going to do config, and then we can see our system prompt. So that'll just pull that value in for us. We don't have to worry about having that hard coded in within our class. Now we're going to define just a quick helper function. So again, this is just LLM helper. We're just going to call it chat. Now, I've got some parameters because we want to pass in the options that we have outlined here into our model when we're communicating with it. So we're going to set up some parameters now. So the first parameter, I'm just going to call it user prompt. So we're going to pass in whatever, this is just the question the user is asking. And we're going to type in, we're going to do model, and then we're going to do max tokens. We're going to set a default for here. We're just going to put 200. If you don't want to pass a max tokens, you don't have to. We'll just have a default value. And then the same here, temp. We're just going to set a default value of 0.7. Next, we are now going to create a reference to the OpenAI library there. We're going to create an instance of it. That way we can communicate with it. So we are going to now create the completion. And this is just called a completion within the documentation for OpenAI. So I'll pull up the documentation really quickly here. Matter of fact, let's pull up the documentation now, and let's just add a reference here. Let's just click on that. Now, if you're ever unsure about how to make a call to a particular API endpoint, right, with a particular model here within OpenAI, you can always go just reference the documentation here. So you can see here, I'm basically using just the exact same snippet here, obviously with some minor changes. We can see, hey, import that, create an instance or client to communicate with OpenAI. And then here is the completion, right? So we do client chat.completions create. So this basically allows us to create a chat conversation with OpenAI. Now, the other parameters, if you want to, make your chat bot a little more robust and allow it to accept more parameters, you can add all of these parameters. I just put some of the core parameters that are super important that a lot of people set, right? Max tokens. This controls obviously the output, but also can help with keeping down on costs. Say if you built this application for production environment, you may want to limit the token output, right? That way you're not hitting 8K tokens when someone's communicating with the underlying API. And then we can go down further. We've got a stream. I didn't set this as a parameter because we want our chat bot by default to stream. So I didn't leave that as an option. And then where was the next? Oh, and there's temperature here. So you can come in here and set as many of these parameters as you want and pass them through here. Again, I'm only setting max token length and the temperature. So this will be the reference to all of the documentation is going to be in the final code repo anyways. So you can always just go in there and clone that entire repo if you want to look at all the links to the documentation, or just if you ran into an issue and couldn't get the code to work, you can just download fully functioning code. So let's finish coding this out here. I'm going to type in client chat completions, and then we're going to create. All right. So the first parameter that we're going to set is the model. Again, we're passing this through as a parameter because we can either communicate with GPT 3.5 Turbo or GPT 4. Next, we're going to do messages, and we're just going to keep it pretty simple here. We're going to create an array, and we're not storing history in this chatbot. We could always set this up where it kept track of the model itself. You could build on top of the previous conversation. So you could ask one question and keep building context on top of your previous question. We're just keeping this chatbot fairly simple to answer one question at a time. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pass a dictionary, and it's going to be role, and we're going to just say system. So this one here, this value here that we're going to set, content, and then system prompt. So this is our system prompt. So this is a way for you to steer your the underlying model in a certain direction. For us, we just said, hey, it's just going to be a helper, right? Like you're just let me see, what did we put in here? So you're just a helpful chatbot assistant, assistant chatbot or whatnot, right? You could just say, hey, you are a expert at health and performance or whatever you want here, and steer the chatbot down that particular path. So here, let's see, where do we have user prompt? Okay. Make sure I didn't type something incorrectly. System prompt. Actually, I'm just going to grab this piece that I know is working. We'll just go here. There we go. All right. And the next thing, actually, I just already have a piece of this, so no point in typing it out completely. If, like, again, you can just hit, go here, view the documentation there. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set the temperature parameter for the model. And again, we're passing that through as temp. And then we're going to set max tokens to equal max tokens, because we're passing that through here. If we don't set it, it'll default to 200. Again, if we don't set temperature, it'll default to 0.7. All right, so the last parameter that we're going to set is stream. Now, this is what gives you the output similar to ChatGPT. If you don't enable this, you can't get that same type of user experience. So you have to set this to true if you want that. Again, we'll go over to the documentation. Let's check out the documentation to see what it says stream does. So it'll if you set this, partial message deltas will be sent just like ChatGPT here. So you're getting chunks of data sent back to you when you set stream to true, and then as the data comes through, you're going to display that on the screen. And so the next function that we're going to add in our LLM helper helps us with that. So I created a helper function to this here. If you don't create this function or something similar, whether you put this in your main chatbot code or not, you will not get the streaming to work, the streaming output to work. So we're just going to call this stream. I just call it stream parser. I'm going to call it stream parser, and it accepts a stream. And you'll see this in action. So again, like I said, when you set this option, it passes your data back in chunks. So we need to loop through those chunks as we get those chunks and display them on the screen. So that's what this function does here. So we're going to say for chunk in stream, and then we're going to say if chunk dot choices, and we're going to go with the first. So we could say, hey, pass us back when we're communicating with the chatbot, passes us back multiple results at once. But we only want to have a one-way conversation. We want to say, ask a question and just give us one result back. So that's why we're saying choice is 0, because you could say, hey, pass me more values back. Let me go to the documentation so I can show you all that. I already have it open. So if we go, let's see if I can find that parameter here. Okay, there you go. So you see the in parameter here, how many chat completion choices to generate with each input message. So if you say 3, if you ask a question to the underlying model in OpenAI and you say, I want 3 results back, it'll pass you 3 results back. But because we didn't set that, it defaults to 1. But just a heads up, if the more you set this to, the larger your token window needs to be, right? So if you say, hey, create me a long story, then it could be, and you set your max tokens to 2,000, right? You could run into some issues there with things being cut off because you hit your token limit. So let's go back here. So we didn't set in. We could go here and set in equal 2. Now this would come back with two outputs, but we're not doing that there. So that's why we say choices equal 0. And then we say delta. So this is going to give us the difference of what was passed back to us previously in that chunk. So, and if not none, because the last output that it's passed back to you is a none value that comes through. So we don't want to display that. So as long as it's not none in the value that comes back here, then we want to yield this back. And the yield just allows you to iterate over a generator. I won't go too deep into that. If you got questions, matter of fact, I'll just leave a reference to what yield does within Python. So we're going to say chunk choices 0 and give us the delta of what was previously passed and give us the content. So I'm going to go back to the documentation again. I'm going to probably jump around to the documentation if I'm making a comment about something. I prefer for you all to be able to see what I'm talking about. So we'll go back over to here. And if you look here, so here's what it looks like to make a call to the API, the request. Now this is what your response looks like. So if we look at the response, we get back, you see this choices here, and it passes it back. It's a list, tells us the index, and then it's a message, and then it tells us the role. So this would be the assistant replying back and the content. So we're grabbing this here, this content here. So that's what's going on there. Just kind of a heads up. All right, let's go back over. And so that's it. That's all it is to building the stream parser here. It's just a little helper method that I put together. I found pretty useful when coding out a chatbot for streaming. Now we do need to return the completion. All right. So this is our LLM helper. We just have a function here, a method here that allows us to chat with the OpenAI function or API. And then we have the stream parser here, which is just a little helper method that allows us to parse the stream coming back from OpenAI. So now we've coded that up, let's go back into our simple chat. And when I said, hey, we're not going to add that one import statement previously, let's now add that import statement. So from helpers dot LLM helper import, and we're going to import the chat, and we're going to import stream parser. We're going to use it here. Okay, so we've got that all set up there now. So now we can make make a reference to or call those within our code. So let's uncomment this here. Again, we're going to create a spinner, and it's going to just say, hey, generating message. But we're going to now, within this spinner here, this is where we're going to do LLM response, and then we're going to call chat. So of course chat has user prompt. So we'll just set user prompt, and then we have model that we're going to set, and it's going to be the model, and that model value comes from what the user selects in this select box there. And then we have max tokens that we're going to set, and that's going to be max token length that we set here. Do a line break, and then we are going to set the last thing, which is temp, and that's going to be temperature. So we set all of these, we get all these values from our chat options in the left-hand chat options section. Now, so we've made our call here to the to OpenAI, and we get that response back. We get this response back again as a stream because we set that parameter. Now we are going to need to, let's grab, I'm just going to call this stream output. And so this, what we're going to do is now do st stream write. So the beautiful part of using Streamlit here to build out applications like this, whether this is a production application or just prototyping, is you're getting a lot of capabilities right out of the box that you don't have to worry about coding yourself. So this, by default, will write a stream out to the screen. But again, we have our stream parser. We're just going to call this method inside that one. And we just pass in LLM response because this expects a stream to come through here, and then again we iterate through that. And so we've got that. So we're going to get that stream output here now. This is going to stream out to the screen for us like you're used to seeing with ChatGPT. And it's going to store the final value here as text for us. So we store that still in a variable. Now we're going to call st session state, and then we're going to call messages dot append. And so this is where we're going to append the response from the actual model here. So I'm going to just copy some code, that way I don't have to just type it all out. Let's put a line break here. So again, up here, where did we do that at? So up here we can see we're adding a message, and the role is user. And then we add the user's content or the user's prompt to the content key for that dictionary. Now we can see here his role is assistant, and we are actually storing the output from the model that was returned to us here. And then we're going to display that. So if we go back to our app, remember I told you that this icon here, so this is, a little human head here. But and this is set because we set the role to assistant or the role to user, but when we set the role to assistant, we're going to see a little robot head there. And a lot of this stuff, again, it's done completely behind the scenes for us. Let me go back here, and what do we call it? Blah, blah, blah. So, yes. So, yeah, we call it assistant. So let's continue on coding. Now, the last thing is just kind of a little tweak that I put in here because I was getting duplicate responses displayed on the screen. So I track the last response. So I say last response. And let me just copy this code here. I'll explain it. Now, let me close this so you can see a little more on the screen. So I store the last response. And so what I do here is I grab the last response. I grab the session state, all the messages stored in session state, and I minus it by 1 because that's going to be the last response back from the underlying model. And then I grab the uh, content of that here. So that's how I get the last response um, from the model there. So the next thing we're going to do is display the response in the chat. So now we want to display the assistant or the chatbot's response. So like we loop through or like we display them at the very top for what the user is asking, we're going to be displaying what the underlying chatbot is saying to us. So I'm going to say if not. And so again, this is just some minor tweaks that I put in here. This is just controlling output. And so I say if the last response and the stream output aren't the same, because if they're the same, it shows duplicate output on the screen. So if they're not the same, I'm going to do st chat messages or chat message. And this time, again, this is an assistant. So remember the with says we're operating in a certain context. So now we're operating in the chat message context of the assistant, because up at the top further, we say, hey, this is the user. So when we put user, again, that controls the icon that's going to be displayed for the message. And then we say assistant, and you'll see that it shows the little robot head. We're going to do markdown, and then we're going to stream output. So we're just going to show this here as output. And so that wraps that up there. So now let's see if our chatbot actually works now. So, all right, we're going to save. I'm going to go back to the browser. Let's refresh. Now, if you recall at the beginning of the video, this is what the app looked like. We're going to change this to GPT-4. We're going to say be super unique. So again, temperature determines how unique will the output be. And then we just max out the at least for this, the options that we set here. You can go higher than this if you want. So let's see. I'm going to say also, just write me a short story about a boy and girl. And let's see what happens. Oh, we got a error. So let's see if we can fix this error and see what happened here. So missing required arguments, expected messages, and model or messages and model stream argument be given. So let's go and track down this particular bug here. So we can see, and it'll tell you the stack trace here. So we can see on line 46 within our simple chatbot, and then we can see the LLM helper. If we go further down, line 10 is where we're running into that problem there. That's where our bug is occurring at. So let's go back over to the code, and you're going to run into this as you're building stuff out. I figured we would hit issue eventually. Oh, where's my code? Oh, wrong thing. All right. No, still wrong thing. Okay. So let's go back over. I believe it said, what line? So it said line 10 in our helper file. Let's see where we messed up in line 10. So line 10 here, model. Then if we look around. Okay, so I found the issue here. So the issue is we put message here instead of messages. And that's what was causing us the issue. Let's go back here, go to terminal. No, we already have it activated. All right, so let's restart this here. And it opens up for us. So again, let's go to GPT-4. Let's do temperature 1. We'll leave the tokens the same. And again, let's see. Write me C# code that adds two numbers together and put it in a function. So let's see what our output is. So we can see it streaming, generating response, and there we go. So it wrote out some code for us, put it in Markdown here. So if we actually wanted to use that code, we could copy it, and then it gave us some explanation of our of the code that was generated here up at the top. So let's do one more thing here. So tell me a long story about a boy and girl. Let's see what it does. All right. So it's now generating, and just like ChatGPT, it's streaming that out for us because of that option that we set and because we created that helper function. So now it's just streaming it all out. And it's still going. So it listened to us. It's definitely telling us a long story about a boy and a girl here. And it's still writing. So I set max token length to 1,000. So it used quite a bit of those tokens there. So we've now created our very own chatbot using Streamlit and OpenAI. So if you found this useful, feel free to hit like and subscribe to the video. Also, I'll be creating other videos that are similar and a little more complex. This was probably on the more simple side when it comes to functionality. Again, we could have added more parameters over here. We could have had this really track the history and actually the context of what the user is asking. So right now, we're only displaying the history here. But if we were to ask the model a question about something we previously discussed, it's not tracking that. It's only displaying the history here for you on the screen. So that's, so we could add some more, fine tweaks to this application. Again, Streamlit is great if you're trying to build out proof of concepts. Again, you could have built this in any web framework of your choice. Again, React, Vue, whatever you would like to build it in. But Streamlit's great for prototyping things out. You've got an idea and you want to build it out. Streamlit's really the route to go. Again, if you like the content, please like, subscribe. If you've got questions, put those questions below. I try to get to all the questions. And again, if you've got ideas about a particular type of application or solution that you would like me to build, feel free to let me know. Again, this channel is geared towards those who are, in the tech field or looking to kind of learn about other technologies. Right now I'm really focused on generative AI, but I also focus heavily on cloud-based technologies also. So if you've got ideas that you would like to see another technology covered on this channel, let me know. Again, thanks for watching the video from the beginning to end, and I hope you like the content, and see you in the next video.